Contracting Options Supply Chain Support Masterclass. My name is Dunya and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. We're joined today by Kate Watson, principal consultant, also from Turner & Townsend. Just to inform you, this is a Retrofit Information Support and Expertise, or RISE, event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner & Townsend. We have been given the following statement from the department. We are only able to comment or provide clarifications on the draft Wave 3 guidance, which was published earlier in May at this time. We cannot comment on timings or next steps for SHDF Wave 3 or any other government schemes. When we are able to share anything further, we will do so. Thank you all for joining once again, and passing over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Danya, and welcome. I think this is the first time we've delivered this slide pack, so really welcome your feedback at the end of it, and whether we need to make any changes afterwards or it's a useful resource as it is. But please also do add any questions to the chat as you go along if anything comes up, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end for some questions and we can review any questions in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to do a brief introduction to considerations for getting on procurement and accessing opportunities for delivery. We'll have a look at some standard forms of contracts, some frameworks, the benefits of frameworks, the disbenefits of frameworks, if you like, also different procurement methods, things that might influence procurement selection, and just we're going to follow up with some more details on how we can support you with your needs. So first up, a quick introduction when we're thinking about applying for tenders. So I've got a very simple customer journey here, or supplier journey as it may be. So you're starting with understanding the requirements and the outcomes. We'll then look at the delivery model that is being employed, consideration of what route to market it is, the procurement procedure, the contracting options, and then we've got some contract management things at the end. So if we just go through these right in a bit more detail. So the understanding the requirements or the outcomes is, so understanding what the expected outcome of the procurement is, whether there's specifics around materials, equipment, works, services, what the scope of the project is, the time and budget allocations for delivery, the flexibility, if there is any, and any risks or constraints with that project. We'll have a look at some of the delivery models that we can go down. I won't go into massive detail, but we can consider traditional construction approach only, design and build frameworks, partnering or alliance models, construction project management or construction management, PFIs. Routes to market, CCS, off the top of my head, it's not ringing a bell, but frameworks and contract frameworks. We've got Procure 21, open source, regional frameworks. You've got Find a Tender, so you can have a look there. They can be a sole source or other frameworks, and there are obviously direct approaches that people come through as well. We've got different procurement procedures. So if it's a very large project, it will be relatively compliant still with OJEU, which is the Open Journal of the European Union. We've got the Find a Tender service, and we need to consider our financial thresholds, or all contracting organisations need to consider the financial thresholds as to which route they go down. So I think OJEU is, I'm probably a bit out of date now, but it was over £4 million. So anything more capital spend of more than 4 million would be OJEU. I'm not quite sure what it is on consulting activity, probably much lower. Open procedure, restricted procedure route, competitive dialogue with negotiation, and then there's innovation partnership routes as well. And then we've got a number of different standard contracts. I think you'll probably be aware, I hope, of JCT and NEC 3 and 4 contracts. There's a number of others that I'm not aware of, so please don't ask me questions about those because I don't know a lot about them. But FIDIC, if you want that, or FIDIC, and so it's an international standard contract used in construction and engineering. So they're known for their colour-coded books, such as the red book for building and engineering works and the yellow book for works designed by a contractor. There's PPC 2000. So that's a standard for the project partnering contract designed to promote collaboration and efficiency in construction projects. And it was introduced in the year 2000, hence probably the name. And then there's iChemie, and these are contracts specifically tailored for process industries, sort of probably focused on chemical engineering. But if you are involved with procuring direct in terms of materials, that might be something that's of interest. And then we've got CMAR, which is a contract event management and reporting. It was a web-based solution designed for managing reporting on contracts. But I think, the most popular forms of contract that I've come across: JCT, NEC, and then bespoke contracts by local authorities. And then we've got a little bit about understanding contract management plan, contract management tools, and then project controls. So let's move on and see what's up next. So we'll have a little look at some of the standard forms, hopefully in a little bit more detail. So as I've just said, there's a number of different types of contract: JCT, NEC, and other contracts. So JCT are considered a market standard for most building projects in the UK. They cover all sorts of types of procurement options and can be adapted for both building and engineering projects. NEC contracts primarily aimed at engineering projects, but being used more frequently in building projects can be a little bit more collaborative than with the client than the JCT. There's a lot of different steps that need to be done at certain points, so it does require better contract management perhaps than some of the others. And I have just gone through some of those other options with you, so I won't go into too much detail now. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at JCT. As I said, it's the most frequently used type of contract in the building industry in the UK. We've got about 80% market share. Hopefully you're all aware of JCT contracts, even if you don't know the full suite. They are drafted by a cross-section of industry bodies. They are acknowledged as sometimes having a slightly pro-contractor bias. So sometimes contracting organisations do look for alternatives because they feel they've got more control over the process if that's what they want. As I said, there's a full suite of different types of contracts. I won't probably remember all of them, but there's minor works, intermediate. You can get designer build contracts, traditional contract approach, and another one that I've used quite a lot in the retrofit industry is measured term contracts as well. I think they're all pretty much online now, so you just need to pay for access to your contract. You can add in some additional clauses. You can remove specific elements, not necessarily all of them, but some of it. So they're pretty good because they're tried, tested. They've got the main clauses that need to be there, and really you just need to add in the bits that are pertinent to your project as they come up. So they are really good to a point, but as with many things in the contracting industry, with sort of building construction in mind, they can be a bit more adversarial. You are asked to put in your kind of means for negotiating should something come up right at the beginning. So it's not necessarily the most collaborative route as a contracting approach that you could take. So we've gone through some of them here, but this has got a bit more detail. So this is looking at the different types of contract on the left side. So you've got standing building contract. It can be a lump sum payment or it can be remeasurement, and there's various different options you can choose there with standard building contract. I'm not sure what these references refer to, but there'll be slightly different variations in the type of contract works, and often used on much bigger complex projects. Probably some of the most well-used contracts that you'll use were these intermediate building contract, minor works, and design and build, and perhaps this minor works with contractors design. As I said, there is also, if you've not used it, I would say it is kind of useful to have a look at the measured term contract. Certainly when I worked at a local authority, we use measured term contract for delivery of owner-occupier properties where we didn't know the property before we went out to tender. So we weren't able to give a very specific detail of the type of window, or the size of the windows, or the square meterage of insulation that we needed. So it allows you to do a kind of, not quite a call off, but you can do one house at a time calculation, and then you can get approval to proceed with that house, and they can be invoiced individually, or you can amalgamate the invoices at the end of the month for each home that has been completed, the works have been completed. So it's quite a neat way of managing projects on an individual property address level. You don't have to do monthly bill of quantities. No, it's not bill of quantities, the valuation reports each month to put in your invoice for payment. So it's just a much neater way of managing the reporting, at least from a local authority's point of view. If you're contracting out, it might not be the same internally, but just to let you know that that's another route that you might want to have a look at. Like JCT, the NEC have a standard suite of different contracts. So the NEC is the second is the most common choice. It takes a more balanced approach in terms of where the responsibility lies and the ability to make decisions. But it's a one-size-fits-all delivery, so it's hard to tailor sometimes for the project. It's flexible, it's clear and simple, and it encourages good management. I think I alluded to it previously. There are some very specific kind of, if you want to use the term SLAs, it's not, but kind of you have to do some certain things within a number of days. Otherwise, there are penalties attached to that. So it really focuses on the core activity that you need to do to progress your project and keep it on track, keep it on time. It promotes a more collaborative way of working, as there's a fairer risk allocation, and so a lot of people like it from that point of view. I know there's often discussions around where risk lies, and it tries to resolve things outside of the courts through dispute networks rather than going through that kind of more adversarial approach. There are lots of different types here in terms of option A, price contract with a lump sum, price contract with bill of quantities, target cost with activity schedule, target cost with bill of quants, cost reimbursable, and a management contract. So it really depends, again, what is the most appropriate for the activity that's being requested as to whether that's the most appropriate route. One of the things around NEC contracts is the Z clauses, which allows the client to put quite a lot of customization into the contract and additional conditions that aren't in the standardized contract. So they are more flexible to try and help find the best contract for the route that you want to do. And they have become extremely popular in the public sector. I think that's because they are a little bit more collaborative. There is that kind of less adversarial approach. I think lots of public sector organisations are looking for opportunities to take a more partnering or collaborative approach to delivery than previously. So I think this really helps in delivering that type of activity. Okay, and this is a slide that really just gives you a bit of kind of a comparison, a very, very high level comparison between the different routes that you would take. So in terms of the colour coding, obviously it's on a risk colour coding with red, not as good, but maybe similar, and then green better than the other ones. And you can see that NEC is really coming out better on quite a lot of different factors than the JCT. But again, it's sometimes a bit horses for courses. And also, if you're not well versed with with NEC, and everybody is well versed with JCT, then it might be a better route just to stick with something that everybody knows how to manage, rather than jumping in the deep end and having to find your way through a new contracting route. So in terms of contract terms, we're looking for a clear scope of works, an agreed program or time frame for delivery. So, start dates, access dates, completion dates, agreed prices or an agreed pricing mechanism to ensure there's a provision for warranties and guarantees, and then the insurance requirements that go alongside often a tender process. And that is to make sure that, you have the appropriate cover in place for normally public liability, professional indemnity, and the employer's liability as well. I know that over the last few years, the professional indemnity has skyrocketed, particularly If you're working in the installation of external wall insulation following the Grenfell tragedy, and then the fire safety requirements have probably cemented in the need for really clear and important insurance levels. So that's one of those things that needs to be considered. In terms of local authority procurement, it's very hard to sort of sometimes get local authorities to reduce their standard liabilities rates. Quite often you'll have a employee's liability at 10 million. That's relatively easy to come by. You'll have a minimum of quite often a public liability insurance of 5, depending on the scope of the work, obviously, and then at least 1 million PI. And I know the PI is the bit that many people struggle with because of the need to continue that for at least 6 years or possibly 12 years after the works have been completed. But I think, the information on this slide is pertinent both to the people that are in contracting bodies who are going to be putting a tender out, and to those people that are responding to that we all need to know very clearly from the tender what's going to happen, and having understandable contract terms really makes that a simpler process for everyone. So clear allocation of risk and liabilities. We often see, I'm sure everybody on the call that's responded will quite often see contracts or tenders that are put out where a lot of risk is put on the contractor. We do have a presentation, we speak to contracting bodies, and we do suggest to them to think very carefully about how much risk they put on the contractor and how much they can share and take on board internally, to sort of help them understand that the bigger the risk for the contractor, the more unknowns, the higher the costs are likely to become at. So if they want assurance around cost, they want the better rates, then sort of managing some of that risk and providing clear information is a better route for them. In terms of what we do in terms of domestic retrofit, we need to really consider the tenants in the properties, how they are going to be managed, who's going to manage them, and what the access requirements are. Is there a minimum or a maximum number of events? What is the contracting body put in place that you need to understand for this contract? It might not be the same on every contract. So you really need to get your head around what that means for you in terms of delivering, and not just responding how you might to, let's say, 9 out of 10. It might be in this occasion, we've got a block of flats that has got people with learning disabilities in it, and you might have to have a different approach on this one. Are there any change control processes, or are there any break clauses or review clauses, I'd say, in the contracts? I think that's one of the important things to understand from the get-go, what your termination rights are, what the dispute resolution processes. Again, it's always better if you can have a dispute resolution process rather than going to sort of a litigation route very quickly, because I think ultimately none of us want to go down a legal route. It's not much fun for anybody. So finding a solution is, in the most instances, the best route for everyone. And then we need to consider the security requirements for the project that we're working on, in terms of, it could be a whole bunch of different types of securities, but for the contracting body, it's quite often understanding the risk of the contractor in terms of their credit rating, past performance, whether they've had any county court judgments against them. And, local authorities use all of the weapons in their arsenal to review that when they're looking at who's applied for their tenders. So there is, I have been in a situation where we've had a best tender winner who's got a really poor credit rating, and we were unable to appoint them because of their credit rating, or they needed to buy a parent company guarantee or a performance bond in order to give the satisfaction that we could proceed with the contract. So understanding the risk to the client and what they might need is really important in understanding what your requirements will be. Again, depending on the size of the project, depending on the type of work that you're doing, those guarantees could be quite expensive or relatively small and inexpensive, and therefore easily something you can pick up and take forward. Okay, so we'll have a little look at some frameworks now. So I'm hoping most of you know about frameworks, but maybe you don't. Frameworks are put in place to help organisations procure a number of approved suppliers. So a lot of local authorities used to do frameworks. They have probably seen a reduction in their specialist staff around procurement over the last 10 to 15 years. So I think fewer are probably running their own frameworks now. So there are a lot more framework providers out there. And what they'll do is run a normal procurement process, and they'll onboard a certain number of suppliers who have been successful achieving the minimum requirements that the framework provider has put in place to get onto that framework. So when I say minimum requirements, that's not the basic minimum requirements. There will be a number of criteria that they put in place. So I think we'll get onto a slide around different types of procurement in a minute, but you might have a two-stage qualification process where you need to answer the pre-qualification questions, the PQQ, which are often a lot of yes/no answers, providing certification to demonstrate that you have the right qualifications, the right insurances, all of that type of information. And if you pass that, you then go on to your ITT stage. And the ITT stage is always the point where you have to provide a price against whatever the pricing requirements are, and you'll often have to provide quality assurance questions around how you'll manage working with different types of people or different types of residents, what your complaints procedure is. There might be social value questions around how you're going to provide additional services into that contract. And once on an approved framework, it's actually much easier for contracting bodies to access pre-approved contractors. So there's different routes that they can go down. Again, a number of organisations, particularly public sector organisations, prefer to go down a competitive route. So they might put out a mini tender within the framework. So everybody on that framework will get a notification to say, here's what the contracting body wants. Are you interested in contracting? This is the time period. This is what you need to do. So they will formulate their own questions. So again, it's the sort of, you will have to respond to those questions, but it's a much shorter form. You won't be asked as many questions as before. And the rates, the price question will be based on the rates you submitted to the framework. So you won't have to reprice anything. It is based on those rates. So, they are very helpful from that point of view. There's agreed terms and conditions and legal protections for both parties within that approach. Many frameworks are divided into multiple lots. So you'll often see things like a renewable lot, an installation lot, consultancy services lot, M&E lots. And obviously, depending on what your skills base is as an organisation, you might submit in multiple lots. You might just submit in one lot. And you have to go through that process for each of them. You normally have the PQQ will probably be very similar, but the answers will be dependent on the type of lot that you're going for. Frameworks generally run for 4 to 5 years, depending on who's running it. So there will be a retendering process, but you will have to wait a while until that comes around. Quite a lot of frameworks will allow the client to direct appoint. Some frameworks only allow the client to direct appoint to the winning bidder, or you have to go in the order of the person that was winning and then the second and then the third, assuming that the first, second, third aren't interested in applying. Maybe if you're fourth on the list, you get an opportunity. Other frameworks will allow you to appoint anybody on that list if you're a contracting body. So that can be really helpful. Sometimes the relationship between contracting party and contractor doesn't work out particularly well. And sometimes they want to exclude that contractor from a future procurement route. So a direct appointment enables the contracting body to do that without having to assess a response from a contractor that they might not want to work with. So it does speed up the procurement process. It's still a little bit lengthy. And obviously, if you're trying to get on a framework, there is a process to get on that framework before you'll even get any work out of it. But following that, hopefully, it's a fairly straightforward process. And it should save I mean, overall, it should save time to the industry across the different sort of suppliers and contracting bodies. So hopefully a better route for most people, but it can also be a bit limiting if you're a smaller organization and struggling to get to meet the requirements of some of these frameworks. So you have to be awarded place on a framework. You'll obviously have to follow the instructions. I've gone through a little bit the instructions the framework want you to follow and provide the information that they've asked you to provide. Each framework will be different. There'll be a different scoring mechanism. There'll be a different pricing mechanism. So you really need to go through that with a fine tooth comb and check what you are being asked to bid on. And I would also say that if you are on a framework and you're receiving a mini tender, please also read that, because not everybody asks the same questions on a framework. So it's definitely worth reading through the preamble before you get to the bit that says, I want 200 homes of whatever it is, and providing an answer on that response. So we've had a little look at some of the liabilities and challenges of joining a framework. So pre-qualification, it will take time. It is a process. But as I said, once you're on it, there are lots of more opportunities. The process will be quicker going forward. The competition process is more challenging for smaller suppliers. As I said, achieving those, making sure you've got all of the correct certification and the right levels on the liabilities is the key thing that is a problem here for smaller suppliers often. It can take quite a bit of time and resource to get on a framework, and that is a longer term payback, hopefully, for people that do get on them. You do have to be compliant with whatever the compliance requirements are for that framework. But if you're looking to work within the retrofit industry, that will include your standard health and safety requirements. But it will also be things like PAS 2030 and providing certification around that as well. In terms of the evaluation of the tender, it's worth double checking what the process is, because they will have to set out the process. They'll have to set out what the percentage of price versus responses to quality questions is and how that is calculated. And often, you'll get, if you're the lowest price, you get 100 points, and then everybody thereafter has a percentage down depending on how far away their costs come in from the person that scored 100%. So it's not necessarily a completely linear scale, so it can change. And there has been a move towards higher quality scored questions than pricing, because it can be very easy for somebody to put in a low price and then the quality can not be great at delivery from a contracting party's point of view. And that can be more troublesome. And actually sometimes what you're looking for is the differentiation that comes out in the quality score. Again, how you're going to manage those complaints, how you deal with a diverse population living in the homes that you're going to go to. And I think I did mention earlier that sort of reading what is in the tender is really important. I have put out a number of tenders over the years for owner-occupier schemes, and have stated very clearly that we don't own the properties. We don't know where the properties are because we've got to go out and find them. They're owner-occupiers. They're not tenants. And then I get a response to a quality question that uses terms like resident liaison officer or tenant liaison officer. And we'll go to your tenants' homes and we're going to do this. And I'm thinking, I don't know what tender you're responding to, because it's not the one I put out. Obviously, it's a regurgitation perhaps of answers to a previous tender. But, if I'm marking that, if I'm evaluating a tender that I've put out and you can't even acknowledge that I have written something specifically for a reason, then I'm kind of like, well, what else are you not going to do? Because you haven't seen this bit and you're not responding to it. So what else are you say you're going to do? But actually, when it comes to reality, are you going to do it? So if you can respond to the tender that's in front of you, rather than the tender you might have responded to previously, or the tender you think it might be, you are likely to be in the evaluator's good books. And, we all try and mark against the marking criteria, but we're all also human, and, you can err on the stingy side of marking. If something's not really clear and it's not really answering the questions that you've put out, or you don't seem to have been specific to that tender, or you can mark on the slightly more lenient side of things because, oh, they seem to have read that and, oh, I know what's going. So it might be a little thing, but actually it can impact how you perform within a procurement process if you're not considering those things at the time of submission. Okay, there's different procurement methods. So quick look through these. So there's a self-delivery procurement method. That's where the organisation, the contracting body, will handle all aspects of the process and they won't even need a supplier because they've probably got in-house team that they're doing it. It'll be a split development. In this approach, the organisation wants to control the programme design and the supply chain, and you might be brought in to deliver part of the overall programme or deliver part of the overall programme. There's turnkey delivery, and that's where the organisation will have a limited amount of in-house contract and management capacity, or isn't that bothered about influencing the outcome, and so they will provide the turnkey delivery provider with the responsibility of managing most of the project. So, bringing on board the subcontractors, doing the programming, getting the residents, choosing the appropriate measures, managing the PAS process. So really kind of only the contracting body is only really interested in how's the spend going? How are the numbers going? Are there any complaints? Have you got all your certificates in place? Can we rubber stamp it and pay the invoice at the end of it? There's a turnkey delivery approach with a nominated supply chain. So this might be where there might be some local suppliers that the contracting body doesn't want to work with. So they will say, we want to see who your suppliers are before we approve them onto our scheme. Or they might say, there are some suppliers that we don't want our schemes, so don't come forward with them as a subcontractor. And there's a dynamic delivery where the organisation has an in-house resources to develop and manage programmes, including things like lead generation, PAS 2035 services. So they might be looking for smaller organisations to deliver part of their programme or an area. If it's geographical based, they might be looking for sort of area based options. So there are plenty of routes for smaller organisations. Not all routes are the best ones also. Okay, so things that might influence being procured. So my first bit of advice is read the blurb at the front. So normally there's some sort of introduction and it will set the scene. Admittedly, some people can write quite a lot. So you might might be 2 pages of writing, but it will set the scene. It will say something about the local authority or the contracting body and what their aspirations are. It will say something about the target audience and the geographical area of the project. And then it will probably say something about the type of activity that they're looking for to contract. And I do recommend reading that and then considering that within your response. Ideally, don't jump straight to that page where it says, oh, it's 70% price and 30% quality. Right, let's put in this price and then we'll just regurgitate that quality question from the last procurement we did. I mean, if you're going to do that, and sometimes sometimes you think, well, it's a good answer. There's no difference in that question. Please do go through it and check that you've got the right name of the organisation that you're applying to for their tender. Because again, I have read stuff that's got the wrong organisation name because it has just been regurgitated from before. So make sure you have somebody who's a proofreader that isn't the person that's read everything, that isn't the person that's written everything, because they need to come at it with a fresh set of eyes and go, do you know what, Dave? On the front page it says we're responding to this tender, but on page 27 it says this organisation. Is that correct? I'm not sure because we don't really mention anything else in between. So who are we responding to? Whose tender? So that would be my first point. Those are my first 2 points. Get those right and you're off to a good start. Understand the scope of the works. Again, not all 2 tenders are the same. So make sure you understand the scope of the works. Are there any specific requirements of the programme? If you are working within the retrofit funded model by government, there will be a start finish date. So you need to understand what those program details are, because it won't be great if you get to middle of March and go, oh, well, we can't actually deliver the rest of this work until end of May, and the funding period ends at the end of March. So at that point, your contracting body's got to go back to the department and go, oh, can we carry on delivering past the end of March? And then there's this, it's a lot of havoc. So just be aware that quite often those funding deadlines, they do stretch out, and there has been a different change in approach as to how you can deliver with co-funding only past the grant funding periods. But there is somebody else at the other end who has to go through a load of hurdles their end, and then goes to the funding body, the government department, and say, can we do this, please? And it takes up a lot of time. So it's best to understand how you can minimize delivery sort of stretching over that funded period by being acute with your planning process, bearing in mind that quite often, getting contracts signed, you're several months into the funding period. If you're also doing resident liaison, you haven't been able to start that. So you might have this very squeezed middle quite often. What are your internal resources? Who are you working with? Can you work with other? Is it better for you to go and work with a kind of tier one contractor and be one of their subcontractors? Or, can you go forward on your own? Do you have the appropriate teams within your organization? Do you have a bid team? You got somebody that's good at responding to that? Do you have somebody that's, pretty particularly good at doing various cost calculations so that you can answer the different types of approaches? What about your legal support? How is it going to work for you as well? Geography is an important one. Again, if you are a local authority, one of your remits as a local authority is to promote economic activity within your local authority boundary area. So wherever possible, they are always looking to promote contracts going to local businesses. It is not always possible. And if it's not always possible and we need to deliver, we'll do it outside of that. But, there's you don't get bonus points if you're local. This is not the way it works in an evaluation process. But if there is a local contractor, they'll be very keen to see whether there is, they've got enough, they answer the questions well enough to be appointed. And unfortunately, sometimes that's not the case. But so it is always down to the evaluation criteria. But bear in mind, the evaluators would much rather appoint somebody who is based out of the same city or based out of the same local authority area. Certainly, if you're not based out of that area and you can use subcontractors, or you can employ staff in the locality to run that project, that is also preferable to parachuting in people from your head office in Newcastle to Bristol, for instance. Okay, understanding property types in an area is really useful. Again, this is where local contractors can quite often have a benefit over sort of bigger contractors from outside the area. There are a lot of consistent house types across the UK, but there are also quite a lot of variables in the materials that are used, particularly with older traditional construction properties. You get certain vernaculars, and if you know how the buildings are built in your local area, you are at an advantage to know how to resolve the problems better. Understand the organisational objectives. That's reading that first bit, the introduction, why I'm putting this tender out. Understand your capacity. Can you deliver this work on your own? Would you be able to respond as a consortium with, I don't know, you can do the insulation, but you want an M&E contractor to do all the ventilation? Could you come together to work on this? And then think about your consortia design and how you're going to work together. Who's going to lead? How's that responsible? It's the same, again, as if you were a consortia of local authorities that are bidding. They have to work out a way to work together, and it should be the same on contracting organisations. We mentioned it, I thought maybe we haven't mentioned it, with PAS 2035, any government funded programme requires you to have PAS 2035, or if you're a contractor, to have PAS 2030 certification in any of the products you want to install, but you will have to deliver under the PAS 2035 process. So, it's knowing assessors, coordinators, evaluators, and what that process is and what their roles are within that process, and or getting the right team so that you've got them in-house. There are pros and cons to obviously having them in-house in terms of a contractor and a client point of view. If I can go to a one-stop shop and I can get somebody who is a coordinator, an assessor, and possibly a designer go out to my house and do all of that in one go, that's better than 3 or possibly 4 people of different organizations coming out and doing all of those works. On the flip side, if you're working for a business as an assessor or a coordinator, you may be tempted to promote the work of the business that you're working for, and that might not be the best solution for that property and the people that live in it. So, from if I was a local authority and I was procuring you, I'd want to know how you're going to manage that, and I'd be keeping beady eyes on the type of measure proposals that will be coming in for works. And I would probably be questioning sometimes, going, well, why aren't you suggesting this? This seems good piece of work. And it might be because that's not the type of work that you do. So there'll be some questions raised around that. So it's useful to understand that whole process and where people sit within that process. We've got a few different examples here. We've got procuring assessors, coordinators and evaluators during the mobilisation, having a designer or stallers overseen by the coordination evaluator kind of combo, having a designer installers that have their own coordinators, and then having a turnkey contractors who provide all of those services, could have separate contracting organisations as well. So lots of different routes to consider, and lots of different routes for contracting bodies to consider as well. Okay, so we're nearly at the end and we've only got 10 minutes left, so probably quick to go through this. We have loads of information on our website, also online on YouTube. There's all of these sort of masterclasses will be up there on demand. So there's a lot of information on a knowledge hub, and we've also got a couple of other organisations here. So Retrofit Academy, Crown Commercial Services as a framework, talk to you about what framework is. And then here we've got some comparisons between JCT and NEC contracts so that you can have a look through those. So yeah, lots of information. We have podcasts, we have regular podcasts. So you might be interested to sort of listen to some of those. We do masterclasses, we've got lots of toolkits. Lots of our work so far to date has been focused very much on potential clients, so local authorities, housing providers. But this time round in our current contract, delivering the RISE resources, we have got this focus on contractors and suppliers as a new route. So there will be more information coming out. Some of the things that were going on last week with our Contractor Week or Suppliers Week will be available on our website too. And that really is the end of our presentation.